Like most of you, I too remember being called on in class and not knowing the answer. Back to this, what do you do when you get a question? How should you react? I got about 6 things I could think up of that happen when you're asked a question, or could possibly happen. For the love of humanity, and because you and I are so intimately connected, this is the Daily Empowerment Podcast. Daily empowerment to empower you, to be wise, to be brave, and to be beautiful. So what do you do when you don't know the answer? So after you have calmed down that reactionary confidensation, or when you try to overcompensate for a lack of confidence, what do I do with the question that has been asked? We've learned very unwisely how to deal with answering questions. This mainly because we all went to the same type of school system. Like most of you, I too remember being called on in class and not knowing the answer. That anxiety, that fear of rejection, the fear of ridicule, and the fear of letting myself down as well as the teacher. And it seemed that the teacher would rather have you say something that was wrong than to not say anything at all. So you couldn't really save face, so to speak. I guess the idea behind this method is once again based on fear. So if you fear enough being called on and not having the right answer, you're going to either study more or pay attention during the lecture, so that way if you're called on unaware, then you'll have the answer and you won't have to fear being called on. And it always seemed that they called on the person who was daydreaming or who had accidentally zoned out. Well, once again, I think fear motivation builds a weakness in character. It makes it so that way you can't trust yourself. You're going to have to rely on that teacher who must know everything. And it's a very wise approach to teach people how they should feel about gaining knowledge or learning. On the other hand, if I was called on and I did know the answer, I felt fairly elated. However, my classmates may not have felt the same. They may have felt happy because they knew the answer as well. They may have felt relieved because they didn't know the answer. They may have felt angry because I got it right and they did know the answer, or angry because I got it right and I knew the answer. So it didn't really create one of the most positively influential methods of learning. And sometimes, right, the teacher would rather have you guess and get it wrong than to not say anything at all. So what is it that we're being taught? Whichever way you slice it, that piece of American pie doesn't bode well for children and the future adults they become on whether or not they have that positive experience about gaining knowledge. In fact, where our grading system in the US comes in, and in many other places, 80 to 90% of those in school are not getting all the answers right, at least comparatively. And so 80 to 90% of those students are being taught that they can't learn well. That's being reinforced every time they don't get the grade. Now, I'm not saying that changing the grading system is or is not the answer. I'm just pointing out where things stand right now. And I think it really has a lot more to do with building that fear and looking at systems that doesn't build a fear of learning but still gets people to learn. Back to this, what do you do when you get a question? How should you react? I got about 6 things I could think up of that happen when you're asked a question, or could possibly happen. Number 1 is that you think you know the answer, and you actually do. The second would be you think you know the answer and you don't. The third, you're unsure of whether or not you know the answer and it turns out you do. Or you're unsure of whether or not you know the answer and it turns out you don't. Or you think you don't know the answer and you actually do. Or you think you don't know the answer and you actually don't. We're going to continue this discussion later. But thank you for tuning into this episode of the Daily Empowerment Podcast. Daily empowerment to empower you to be wise, to be brave, and to be beautiful. Now, if you haven't already, you need to subscribe to the interactive empowerment newsletter. I may not be sending things out daily because mostly I want this to be more of a genuine connection between you and I, where we have a chance to explore these ideas of nonlinear goal setting, of how to help us become a wiser species. Remember, the views you hear are not necessarily representative of our management company or our affiliates, and anything you hear should first be reviewed by the corresponding professional. Whether that's medical, legal, or financial before applying it to your life, all rights are reserved by the content's creators.